Section 15, Ingersolls Lecture on the Review of His Reviewers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ingersoll's Lecture on the Review of His Reviewers, from the book Lectures of Colonel Robert Green Ingersoll, Volume 2. Ladies and gentlemen, what have I said? What has been my offense? I have been spoken of as if I were a wolf endeavoring to devour the entire fold of sheep in the absence of the shepherd. I believe in the trinity of observation, reason, and science, the trinity of man, woman, and child, the trinity of love, joy, and hope, and thought that every man has a right to think for himself, and no other man has the right to debar him of this privilege by torture, by social ostracism, or any of the numerous other expedients resorted to by the enemies of advancement. I ask, does God wish the lip worship of a slave, a sneak, of the man that dares not reason? If I were the infinite God, I would rather have the worship of one good man of brains than a world of such men. I am told that I am in danger of everlasting fire, and that I shall burn forever in hell. I tell you, my friends, if I were going to hell tonight, I would take an overcoat with me. Do not tell me that the eternal future of a man may depend upon his belief. I deny it. That a man should be punished for having come to an honest conclusion, the honest production of his brain, that an honest conclusion should be deemed a crime, and so declared, it is an infamous, monstrous assertion, and I would rather go to hell than to keep the company of a God who would damn his child for an honest belief. Next, I preached that a woman was the equal of man, entitled to everything that he is entitled to be his partner, and to be cherished and respected because she is the weaker, to be treated as a splendid flower. I said that man should not be cross to her, but fill the house that she is in with such joy that it would burst out at the window. I have said that matrimony is the holiest of sacraments, and I have said that the Bible took woman up thousands of years ago and handed her down to man as a slave. And I have said that the Bible is a barbarous book for teaching that she is a slave, and I repeat it, and will prove later what I have said. I have pleaded for the right of man, of wife, and of the little child. I have said we can govern children by love and affection. I have asked for tender treatment for the child of crime. I have asked mothers to cease beating their children and take them to their hearts. And for this I am denounced by the religious press and men in the pulpits as a demon and a monster of heresy, who should be driven out from among you as an unclean thing. But I should not complain. Only a few years ago I should have been compelled to look at my denouncers through flame and smoke, but they dare not treat me so now, or they would. 100 years ago I should have been burned for claiming the right of reason. 50 years ago I should have been imprisoned, and my wife and children would have been torn away from me. And 25 years ago I could not have made a living in the United States in my profession, the law. But I live now and can see through it all, and all is light. I delivered another lecture on ghosts, in which I sought to show that man had been controlled in the past by phantoms created by his own imagination, in which the pencil of fear had drawn pictures for him on the canvas of superstition, and that men had groveled in the dirt before their own superstitious creations. I endeavored to show that man had received nothing from these ghosts but hatred, blood, ignorance, and unhappiness, and that they had filled our world with woe and tears. This is what I endeavored to show, no more. Now everyone has as much right to differ with me as I with them, but it does not make the slightest difference for the purpose of argument whether I am a good man or a bad, whether I am ugly or handsome, although I would not object to resting my case on that issue. The only thing to be considered and discussed is what I have said true, or is it untrue? Now I said that the Bible came from the ghosts, and that they gave us the doctrine of immortality of the soul, which I deny. Now the immortality of the soul, if there is such a thing, is a fact, and therefore no book could make it. If I am immortal, I am. If not, no book can make me so. The doctrine of immortality is based in the hope of the human heart, and is not derived from any book or creed. It has its origin in the ebb and flow of the human affections, and will continue as long as affection, and is the rainbow in the sky of hope. It does not depend on a book, on ghosts, superstition of any kind. It is a flower of the human heart. I did say that these ghosts, or the book, taught that human slavery was right, that most monstrous of all crimes, that makes miserable the victim and debases the master, for a slave can have all the virtues while the master cannot. I did say that it riveted the chains upon the oppressed, and that it counseled the robbing of that most precious of all boons, liberty. I add that the book upheld all this, that it sustained and sanctified the institution of human slavery. I did also assert that this same book, which my critics claim was inspired by God, inculcated the doctrine of witchcraft, for which people, through its teaching, were hanged and burned for bringing disease upon the regal persons of kings, and for souring beer. I did say that this book upheld that most of all infamies, polygamy, and that it did not teach political liberty or religious toleration, but political slavery and the most wretched intolerance. I did try to prove that these ghosts knew less than nothing about medicine, politics, legislation, astronomy, geology, and astrology, but I am also aware that in saving these things I have done what my censors think I ought not to have done. But the victor ought not to feel malice, and I shall have none. As soon as I had said all these things, some gentlemen felt called upon to answer them, which they had a right to do. Now, I like fairness, am enamored with it, probably because I get so little of it. I can say a great many mean things, for I have read all the religious papers, and I ought to be able to account for every motive in a mean manner after. The first gentleman whom I shall call your attention to is the Reverend Dr. Woodbridge. It seems that when I delivered my lectures, the conclusion had come to, that man does not believe in anything but matter and force. That man does not believe in spirit. Why not? If by spirit you mean that which thinks, I am one of them myself. If you mean by spirit that which hopes and reasons and loves and aspires, why then I am a believer in spirits. But whatever spirit there is in this universe, I will take my oath is a natural product, and not superimposed upon this world. All I will say is that whatever is natural, and there is as much goodness in my judgment, as much spirit here in this world as in any other, and you are just as near the heart of the universe here as you ever can be. But they say there is matter and force, and there is force and there is spirit. Well, what of it? There is no matter without force. What would keep it together unless there was force? Can you imagine matter without force? Honor bright, can you conceive of force without matter? And what is spirit? They say spirit is the first thing that ever was. It seems to me sometimes as though spirit was the blossom and fruit of all, and not the commencement. But they say spirit was first. What would that spirit do? No force, no matter, a spirit living in an infinite vacuum without side, edge, or bottom. This spirit created the world, and if this spirit did, there must have been a time when it commenced to create, and back of that an eternity spent in absolute idleness. Can a spirit exist without matter or without force? I honestly say I do not know what matter is, what force is, what spirit is. But if you mean by matter anything that I can touch, or by force anything that we can overcome, then I believe in them. If you mean by spirit anything that can think and love, I believe in spirits. The next critic who assailed me was the Reverend Mr. Kalloch. I am not going to show you what I can withstand. I am not going to say a word about the reputation of this man, although he took some liberties with mine. This gentleman says negation is a poor thing to die by. I would just as lief die by that as the opposite. He spoke of the last hours of Paine and Voltaire and the terrors of their deathbeds. But the question arises, is there a word of truth in all he said? I have observed that the murderer dies with courage and firmness in many instances, but that does not make me think that it sanctified his crime. In fact, it makes no impression upon me one way or the other. When a man through old age or infirmity approaches death, the intellectual faculties are dimmed, his senses become less and less, and as he loses these, he goes back to his old superstition. Old age brings back the memories of childhood, and the great bard gave in the corrupt and besotted Falstaff, who prattled of babbling brooks and green fields, an instance of the retracing steps taken by the memory at the last gasp. It has been said that the Bible was sanctified by our mothers. Every superstition in the world from the beginning of all time has had such a sanctification. The Turk dying on the Russian battlefield, pressing the Koran to his bosom, breathes his last thinking of the loving adjuration of his mother to guard it. Every superstition has been rendered sacred by the love of a mother. I know what it has cost the noble and the brave to throw to the winds these superstitions. Since the death of Voltaire, who was innocent of all else than a desire to shake off the superstitions of the past, the curse of Rome has pursued him, and ignorant Protestants have echoed that curse. I like Voltaire. Whenever I think of him, it is as a plumed knight coming from the fray with victory shining upon his brow. He was once in the Bastille, and while there he changed his name from Francis Marie Aloysius to Voltaire, and when the Bastille was torn down, Voltaire was the battle cry of those who did it. He did more to bring about religious toleration than any man in the galaxy of those who strove for the privilege of free thought. He was always on the side of justice. He was full of faults and had many virtues. His doctrines have never brought unhappiness to any country. He died as serenely as anyone could. Speaking to his servant, he said, "Farewell, my faithful friend." Could he have done a more noble act than to recognize him who had served him faithfully as a man? What more could be wished? And now let me say here, I will give $1,000 in gold to any clergyman who can substantiate that the death of Voltaire was not as peaceful as the dawn. And of Thomas Paine, whom they assert died in fear and agony, frightened by the clanking chains of devils, in fact, frightened to death by God. I will give $1,000 likewise to anyone who can substantiate this absurd story, a story without a word of truth in it. And let me ask, who dies in the most fear? The man who, like the saint, exclaims, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Or Voltaire, who peacefully and quietly bade his servant farewell? The question is not who died right, but who lived right. I look upon death as the most unimportant moment of life, and believe that not half the responsibility is attached to dying that is to living properly. This Reverend Mr. Kalloch is a Baptist. He has a right to be a Baptist. The first Baptist, though, was a heretic. But it is among the wonders that when a heretic gets 15 or 20 to join him, he suddenly begins to be orthodox. Roger Williams was a Baptist, but how he or anyone not destitute of good sense could be one passes my comprehension. Let me illustrate. Suppose it was the day of judgment tonight, and we were all assembled, as the ghosts say we will be judged, and God should ask a man, "Have you been a good man?" Yes. "Have you loved your wife and children?" Yes. "Have you taken good care of them and made them happy?" Yes. "Have you tried to do right by your neighbors?" Yes. "Paid all your debts?" Yes. And then cap the climax by asking, "Were you ever baptized?" Could a solitary being hear that question without laughing? I think not. I once happened to be in the company of 6 or 7 Baptist elders. I never have been able to understand since how I got into such bad company, and they wanted to know what I thought of baptism. I answered that I had not given the matter any attention. In fact, I had no special opinion on the subject. But they pressed me, and finally I told them that I thought, with soap, baptism was a good thing. The Reverend Mr. Guard has attacked me, and has described me, among other things, as a dog barking at a train. Of course, he was the train. He said, first, the Bible is not an immoral book, because I swore upon it when I joined the Free and Accepted Masons. That settles the question. Secondly, he says that Solomon had softening of the brain and fatty degeneration of the heart. Thirdly, that the Hebrews had the right to slay all the inhabitants of Canaan according to the doctrine of the survival of the fittest. He says that the destruction of these Canaanites, the ripping open by the bloody sword of women with child, was an act of sublime mercy. Think of that! He says that the Canaanites should have been driven from their homes, and not only driven, but that the men who simply were guilty of the crime of fighting for their native land, the old men with gray hairs, the old mothers, the young mothers, the little dimpled prattling child, that it was an act of sublime mercy to plunge the sword of religious persecution into old and young. If that is mercy, Let us have injustice. If there is that kind of a God, I am sorry that I exist. Fourthly, Mr. Guard said God has the right to do as he pleases with the beings he has created. And fifthly, that God, by choosing the Jews and governing them personally, spoiled them to that degree that they crucified him the first opportunity they had. That shows what a good administration will do. Sixthly, he says polygamy is not a bad thing when compared with a picture of Anthony and Cleopatra now on exhibition in this city. I will just say one word about art. I think this is one of the most beautiful words in our language, and do you know, it never seemed to me necessary for art to go into partnership with a rag. I like the paintings of Angelo, of Raphael. I liked those splendid souls that are put upon canvas, all there is of human beauty. There are brave souls in every land who worship nature grand and nude, and who with swift, indignant hand tear off the fig leaves of the prude. Seventhly, it may be said that the Bible sanctions slavery, but that it is not an immoral book if it does. Mr. Guard playfully says that he is a puppy 9 days old, that he was only 8 days old when I came here. I'm inclined to think he has overstated his age. I account for his argument precisely as he did for the sin of Solomon, softening of the brain or fatty degeneration of the heart. It does seem to me that if I were a good Christian and knew that another man was going down to the bottomless pit to be miserable and in agony forever, I would try to stop him, and instead of filling my mouth with epithet and invective, and drawing the lips of malice back from the teeth of hatred, my eyes would be filled with tears, and I would do what I could to reclaim him and take him up in the arms of my affection. The next gentleman is the Reverend Mr. Robinson, who delivered a sermon entitled Ghost Against God, or Ingersoll Against Honesty. Of course, he was honest. He apologized for attending an infidel lecture upon the ground that he hated to contribute to the support of a materialistic showman. I am willing to trade faggots for epithets, and the rack for anything that may be said in his sermon. I am willing to trade the instrument of torture with which they could pull the nails from my fingers for anything which the ingenuity of orthodoxy can invent. When I saw that report, although I do not know that I ought to tell it, I felt bad. I knew that man's conscience must be rankling like a snake in his bosom, that he had contributed $1 to the support of a man as bad as I. I wrote him a letter in which I said, "The Reverend Samuel Robinson, my dear sir, in order to relieve your conscience of the stigma of having contributed to the support of an unbeliever in ghosts, I hereby enclose the $1 you paid to attend my lecture." I then gave him a little good advice to be charitable, and regretted exceedingly that any man could listen to me for an hour and a half and not go away satisfied that other men had the same right to think that he had. The speaker went on to answer the argument of Mr. Robinson with regard to persecution, contending that Protestants had been guilty of it no less than Catholics, and showing that the first people to pass an act of toleration in the New World were the Catholics in Maryland. The reverend gentleman has stated also that infidelity has done nothing for the world in the development of art and science. Has he ever heard of Darwin, of Tyndall, of Huxley, of John W. Draper, of Auguste Comte, of Descartes, Laplace, Spinoza, or any man who has taken a step in advance of his time? Orthodoxy never advances. When it does advance, it ceases to be orthodoxy. A reply to certain strictures in the Occident led the lecturer up to another ministerial critic, namely, the Reverend W. E. Igems. I want to say that so far as I can see in his argument, this gentleman has treated me in a kind and considerate spirit. He makes 2 or 3 mistakes, but I suppose they are the fault of the report from which he quoted. I am made to say in his sermon that there is no sacred place in the universe. What I did say was, there is no sacred place in all the universe of thought. There is nothing too holy to be investigated, nothing too sacred to be understood. And I said that the fields of thought were fenceless, that they should be without a wall. I say so tonight. He further said that I said that a man had not only the right to do right, but to do wrong. What I did say was, liberty is the right to do right, and the right to think right, and the right to think wrong, not the right to do wrong. That is all I have to say in regard to that gentleman, except that so far as I could see, he was perfectly fair, and treated me as though I was a human being as well as he. The speaker sarcastically referred to the slurs thrown upon him by his reviewers, who have claimed that his theories have no foundation, his arguments no reason, and that his utterances are vapid, blasphemous, and unworthy a reply. He said that their statements and their actions were sadly at variance, for, while declaring him a senseless idiot, they spent hours in striving to prove themselves not idiots. In other words, in one breath they declare that his views were absolutely without point and needed no explaining away, while in direct rebuttal of this declaration they devoted time and labor in attempts to disprove the very things they called self-evident absurdities. Turning from this subject, Mr. Ingersoll read numerous extracts from the Bible, with interpolated comments. He claimed that the Bible authorized slavery, and that many devoted believers in that book had turned the cross of Christ into a whipping post. He did not wish it understood that he could find no good in believers in creeds. Far from it, for some of his dearest friends were most orthodox in their religious ideas, and there had been hundreds of thousands of good men among both clergy and laymen. History has shown no people more nobly self-sacrificing than the Jesuit fathers who first visited this country to proselytize among the Indians. But these men and their like were better than their creeds, better than the book in which their faith was centered. The Bible tells us distinctly that the world was made in 6 days, not periods, but actual bona fide days, a statement which it iterates and reiterates. It also tells us that God lengthened the day for the benefit of a gentleman named Joshua, in other words, that he stopped the rotary motion of the earth. Motion is changed into heat by stoppage, and the world turns with such velocity that its sudden stoppage would create a heat of intensity beyond the wildest flight of our imagination, and yet this impossible feat was performed that Joshua might have longer time to expend in slaying a handful of Amorites. The Bible also upholds the doctrines of witchcraft and spiritualism, for Saul visited the witch of Endor, and she, after preparing the cabinet, trotted out the spirit of Samuel, said spirit kindly joining in conversation with Saul without requiring the aid of a trance medium. The speaker then quoted at length from Leviticus concerning wizards and evil spirits, described the temptation of Christ by Satan, and the driving of devils from man into swine. He sneered at the rights of children as biblically described, citing the law which sentenced them to be stoned to death for disobedience to parents, the almost sacrifice of Isaac by his father, and the actual murder of Jephthah's daughter, asking if a God who could demand such worship was worthy the love of man. He next referred to the conversation between God and Satan concerning the man Job, and of the reward given to the latter for his long continued patience. His 3 daughters and his 7 sons had been taken from him merely to test his patience, and the merciful God gave him in exchange 3 other daughters and 7 sons, but they were not the children whom he had loved and lost. The Bible represents woman as vastly inferior to man, while he believed, with Robbie Burns, that God made man with a prentice hand, and woman after he had learned the trade. Polygamy also was a doctrine supported by this pure and pious work, a doctrine so foul that language is not strong enough to express its infamy. The Bible taught, as a religious creed, that if your wife, your sister, your brother, your dearest friend tempted you to change from the religion of your fathers, your duty to God demanded that you should at once strike a blow at the life of your tempter. Let us suppose, then, that in truth God went to Palestine and selected the scanty tribes of Israel as his chosen people, and supposing that he afterward came to Jerusalem in the shape of a man and taught a different doctrine from the one prescribed by their book and their clergy, and that the chosen people, in obedience to the education he had prepared for them, struck at the life of him who tempted them. Were they to be cursed by God and man because the former had reaped the harvest of his own sowing? End of section 15. This is a LibriVox recording read for you by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina on June 18th, 2009. Section 16, Ingersoll's Lecture on How the Gods Grow. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ingersoll's Lecture on How the Gods Grow, from the book Lectures of Colonel Robert Green Ingersoll, Volume 2. Ladies and gentlemen, priests have invented a crime called blasphemy. That crime is the breastwork behind which ignorance, superstition, and hypocrisy have crouched for thousands of years and shot their poisoned arrows at the pioneers of human thought. Priests tell us that there is a God somewhere in heaven who objects to a human being thinking and expressing his thought. Priests tell us that there is a God somewhere who takes care of the people of this world, a God somewhere who watches over the widow and the orphan, a God somewhere who releases the slave, a God somewhere who visits the innocent man in prison. The same God that has allowed men for thousands of years to burn to ashes human beings simply for loving that God. We have been taught that it is dangerous to reason upon these subjects, extremely dangerous, and that of all crimes in the world, the greatest is to deny the existence of that God. Redden your hands in innocent blood, steal the bread of the orphan, deceive, ruin, and desert the beautiful girl who has loved and trusted you, and for all this you may be forgiven. For all this you can have the clear writ of that bankrupt court of the gospel. But deny the existence of one of these gods, and the tearful face of mercy becomes lurid with eternal hate. The gates of heaven are shut against you, and you, with an infinite curse ringing in your ears, commence your wanderings as an immortal vagrant, as a deathless convict, as an eternal outcast. And we have been taught that the infinite has become enraged at the finite simply when the finite said, "I don't know." Why, imagine it! Suppose Mr. Smith should hear a couple of small bugs in his front yard discussing the question as to the existence of Smith. And suppose one little red bug swore on the honor of a bug that in his judgment no such man as Smith lived. What would you think of Mr. Smith if he fell into a rage and brought his heel down on this little atheist bug and said, "I will teach you that Smith is a diabolical fact"? And yet, if there is an infinite God, there is infinitely a greater difference between God and a human being than between Shakespeare and the smallest bug that ever crawled. It cannot be. There is something wrong in this somewhere. I am told also that this being watches over us, takes care of us. And the other day I read a sermon, you will hardly believe it, but I did. I had nothing else to. I had read everything in that paper, including the advertisements. So I read the sermon. It was a sermon by Reverend Mr. Moody on prayer, in which he took the ground that our prayer should be, "Thy will be done." And he seemed to believe that if we prayed that prayer often enough, we could induce God to have his own way. He gives an instance of a woman in Illinois who had a sick child, and she prayed that God would not take from her arms that babe. She did not pray, "Thy will be done," but she prayed, according to Mr. Moody, almost a prayer of rebellion, and said, "I cannot give up my babe." God heard her prayer, and the child got well. And Mr. Moody says it was an idiot when it got well. For 15 years that woman watched over and took care of that idiotic child. And Mr. Moody says, how much better would it have been if she had allowed God to have had his own way. Think of a God who would punish a mother for speaking to him from an agonizing heart and saying, "I cannot give up my babe," and making the child an idiot. What would the devil have done under the same circumstances? That is the God we are expected to worship. I range myself with the opposition. The next day I read another sermon preached by the Reverend DeWitt Talmage, a man of not much fancy, but of great judgment. He preached a sermon on dreams, and went on to say that God often visited us in dreams, and that he often convinces men of his existence in that way. So far as I am concerned, I had rather see something in the light. And according to that sermon, there was a poor woman in England, a pauper who had the rheumatism, and there was another pauper who had not the rheumatism. And the pauper who had not the rheumatism used to take food to the pauper that had. After a while the pauper without rheumatism died, and then the pauper with the rheumatism began to think in her own mind, "Who will bring me food?" That night God appeared to her in a dream. He did not cure her rheumatism, though. He appeared to her in a dream, and he took her out of the house and pointed on the right hand to an immense mountain of bread, and on the left hand to an immense mountain of butter. And when I read that, I said to myself, "My Lord, what a place that would be to start a political party." And he said to her, "These belong to your Father. Do you think that he will allow one of his children to starve?" What a place would Ireland be with that mountain of bread and butter! Until I read these two sermons, I hardly believed that in this day and generation anybody believed that God would make a child an idiot simply because the mother had prayed for its sweet dear life, or that God's visits are only in dreams. But so it is. Orthodoxy has not advanced upon the religion of the Fiji Islander. It is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Now we are told that there is a God, and nearly every nation has had a God, generally a good many of them. You see, the raw material was so cheap and gods were manufactured so easily that heaven has always been crammed with the phantoms of these monsters. But they say there is a God, and every savage tribe believes in a God. It is an argument made to me every day. I concede to you that fact. I concede to you that all savages agree with you. I admit it takes a certain amount of civilization, a certain amount of thought, to rise above the idea that some personal being, for his own ends, for his own glory, made and governs this universe. I admit that it takes some thought to see the universe is good, and all that is good, and every star that shines is a part of God, and I am something no matter how little, and that the infinite cannot exist without me, and that therefore I am a part of the infinite. I admit that it takes a little civilization to get to that point. Now, every nation has made a god, and every man that has made a god has used himself for a pattern, and men have put into the mouth of their god all their mistakes in astronomy, in geography, in philosophy, in morality, and the god is never wiser or better than his creators. If they believe in slavery, so did he. If they believe in eating human flesh, he wanted his share. If they were polygamous, so was he. If they were cruel, so was he. And just to the extent that man has become civilized, he has civilized his God. You can hardly imagine the progress that our God has made in 4,000 years. 4,000 years ago he was a barbarian. Tonight he is quite an educated gentleman. 4,000 years ago he believed in killing and butchering little babes at the breasts of their mothers. He has reformed. 4,000 years ago he did not believe in taking prisoners of war. He said, "Kill the old men, mingle their blood with the white hair. Kill the women. What shall we do, O God, with the maidens? Give them to satisfy the lust of the soldiers and of the priests." If there is anywhere in the serene heaven a real God, I want him to write in the book of his eternal remembrance opposite my name that I deny that lie for him. 4,000 years ago our God was in favor of slavery. 4,000 years ago our God would have a man beaten to death with rugged rocks for expressing his honest thought. 4,000 years ago our God told the husband to kill his wife if she disagreed with him upon the important subject of religion. 4,000 years ago our God was a monster, and if he is any better now it is simply because we have made him so. I am talking about the God of the Christian world. There may be, for aught I know, upon the shore of the eternal vast, some being whose very thought is the constellation of those numberless stars. I do not know. But if there is, he has never written a Bible. He has never been in favor of slavery. He has never advocated polygamy, and he never told the murderer to sheathe his dagger in the dimpled breast of a babe. But they say to me, "Our God has written a book." I'm glad he did. And it is by that book that I propose to judge them. I find in that book that it was a crime to eat of the tree of knowledge. I find that the church has always been the enemy of education, and I find that the church still carries the flaming sword of ignorance and bigotry over the tree of knowledge. And if that story is true, ought we not, after all, to thank the devil? He was the first schoolmaster. He was the first to whisper liberty in our ears. He was the author of modesty. He was the author of ambition and progress. And as for me, give me the storm and tempest of thought and action rather than the dead calm of ignorance and faith. Punish me when and how you will, but first let me eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And there is one peculiar thing I might as well speak of here. While the world has made gods, it has also made devils. And as a rule, the devils have been better friends to man than the gods. It was not a devil that drowned the world. It was not a devil that covered with the multitudinous waves of an infinite sea the corpses of men, women, and children. That was the good God. The devil never sent pestilence and famine. The devil never starved women and children. That was the good God. The meanest thing recorded of the devil is what happened concerning my servant Job. According to that book, God met the devil and said, "Where have you been?" "Oh, been walking up and down." "Have you noticed my man Job? Nobody like him." "Well, who wouldn't be? You have given him everything, but take away what he has and he will curse you to your face." And so the devil went to work and tried it. It was a mean thing, and that was all done to decide what you might call a wager on a difference of opinion between the serene highnesses. He took away his property, but Job didn't sin. And when God met the devil, he said, "Well, what did I tell you, smarty?" "Ah," he said, "that is all very well, but you touch his flesh and he will curse you." And he did. But Job didn't curse him. And then what did God do to help him? He gave him some other children better looking than the first ones. What kind of an idea is that for a God to kill our children and then give us better looking ones? If you have loved a child, I don't care if it is deformed, if you have held it in your arms and covered its face with kisses, you want that child back and no other. I find in this Bible that there was an old gentleman a little short of the article of hair, and as he was going through the town a number of little children cried out to him, "Go up, thou bald head," and this man of God turned and cursed them. A real good humored fellow. And 2 bears came out of the woods and tore in pieces 42 children. How did the bears get there? Elisha could not control the bears. Nobody but God could control the bears in that way. Now just think of an infinite God making a shining star, having his attention attracted by hearing some children saying to an old gentleman, "Go up, thou bald head," and then speaking to his secretary or somebody else, "Bring in a couple of bears now." What a magnificent God! What would the devil have done under the same circumstances? And yet that is the God they want to put into the Constitution in order to make our children gentle and kind and loving. You hate a God like that. I do. I despise him. And yet little children in the Sabbath school are taught that infamous lie. Why, I have very little respect for an old man that will get mad about such a thing anyway. What would the Christian world say of me if I should have a few children torn to pieces if they should make that remark in my face? What would the devil have done under the same circumstances? I tell you, I cannot worship a God who is no better than the devil. I cannot do it. And if you will just read the Old Testament with the bandage off your eyes and the cloud of fear from your heart, you will come to the conclusion that it was written not only by men, but by barbarians, by savages, and that it is totally unworthy of a civilized age. I believe in no God who believes in slavery. I will worship no God who ever said that one of his children should own another of his children. But they say to me, there must be a God somewhere. Well, I say, I don't know. There may be. I hope there is more than one. One is so lonesome. Just think of an old bachelor, always alone. I want more than one. And they say, somebody must have made this. Well, I say, I don't know. But it strikes me that the indestructible cannot be created. What would you make it of? Oh, nothing. Well, it strikes me that nothing, considered in the light of raw material, is a decided failure. For my part, I cannot conceive of force apart from matter, and I cannot conceive of matter apart from force. I cannot conceive of force somewhere without acting upon something, because force must be active, or it is not force, and if it has no matter to act upon, it ceases to be force. I cannot conceive of the smallest atom of matter staying together without force. Beside, if some God made all this, there must have been some morning when he commenced, and if he has existed always, there is an eternity back of that when he never did anything, when he lived in an infinite whole without side, top, or bottom. He did not think, for there was nothing to think about. Certainly he did not remember, for nothing had ever happened. Now I cannot conceive of this. I do not say it is not so. I may be damned for my smartness, yet I simply say I cannot conceive of it, that is all. But men tell me you cannot conceive of eternity. That is just what I can conceive of. I cannot conceive of its stopping. They say I cannot conceive of infinite space. That is just what I can conceive of, because let me imagine all I can, my imagination will stand upon the verge and see infinite space beyond. Infinite space is a necessity of the mind, because I cannot think of enough matter to fill it. Eternity is a necessity of the mind, because I cannot dream of the cessation of time. But they say there is a design in the world, consequently there must be a designer. Well, I don't know. Paley says that the more wonderful a thing is, the greater the necessity for creation. That a watch is a wonderful thing, and that it must have had a creator. That the watchmaker is more wonderful than the watch, therefore he must have had a creator. Then we come to God. He is altogether more wonderful than the watchmaker, therefore he had no creator. There is a link out somewhere. I don't pretend to understand it. And so I say that had the world been any other way, you would have seen the same evidence of design precisely. We grow up with our conditions, and you cannot imagine of a first cause. Why? Every cause has an effect. Strike your hands together, they feel warm. The effect becomes a cause instantly, and that cause produces another effect, and the effect another cause, and there could not have been a cause until there was an effect, because until there was an effect, nothing had been caused. Until something had been caused, I am positive there was no cause. Now you cannot conceive of a lost effect, because the lost effect of which you can think will in turn become a cause, and that cause produce another effect. And as you cannot think of a lost effect, you cannot think of a first cause. It is not thinkable by the human mind. They say God governs this world. Why does he not govern Russia as well as he does Massachusetts? Why does he allow the Czar to send beautiful girls of 16, 17, 18, simply for saying a word in favor of human liberty, to mines in Siberia, where they draw carts with knees bruised and bleeding, with hands scarred and swollen? What is that God worth that allows such things in the world he governs? Did he govern this country when it had 4 millions of slaves? When it turned the cross of Christ into a whipping post? When the Holy Bible was an auction block on which the mother stood while her babe was sold from her breast? When bloodhounds were considered apostles? Was God governing the world when the prisoners were confined in the Bastille? It seems to me if there is a God, and someone would repeat the word Bastille, it would cover almost his face with the blood of shame. But they say heaven will balance all the ills of life. Let us see. A large majority of us are sinners, at least a large majority with whom I am acquainted, and a majority of the Christians with whom I am acquainted are worse than sinners. And if their doctrine is true, you will be astonished at the gentlemen you will see in hell that day. You will know by the cast of their countenance that they used to preach here. They say that it may be that sinners here have a very good time, and that the Christians don't have a very good time, that it is awful hard work to serve the Lord, and that you carry a cross when you deny yourself the delights of murder and forgery and all manner of rascality that fills life with delight. But they say that while the rascals are having a good time, they will catch it in the other world. But according to their account, 99 out of 100 will be damned, and I think it will be a close call for the 100th. Like that dear old Scotch woman, when she was talking about the Presbyterian faith, someone said to her, "My dear woman, if your doctrine is true, nobody but you and your husband will be saved." "Ah," said she, "I'm not sure about John." About 1 in 100 will be saved, and the other 99 will be in misery. So that on the average there will not be half as much happiness in the next world as in this. So instead of God's plan getting better, it gets worse, and throughout all the ages of eternity there will be less happiness than in this world. This world is a school. This world is where we develop moral muscle. It may be that we are here simply because men cannot advance only through agony and pain. If it is necessary to have pain and agony to advance morally, then nobody can advance in heaven. Hell will be the only place offering opportunities to any gentleman who wishes to increase his moral muscle. A gentleman once asked me if I could suggest any improvement on the present order of things, if I had the power. "Well," said I, "in the first place I would make good health catching instead of disease. There will be no humanity until we get the orthodox God out of our religion. I want to do what little I can to put another one in God's name, so that we will worship a supreme human God, so that we will worship mercy, justice, love, and truth, and not have the idea that we must sacrifice our brother upon the altar of fear to please some imaginary phantom. See what Christianity has done for the world. It has reduced Spain to a guitar, Italy to a hand organ, and Ireland to exile. That is what religion has done. Take every country in the whole world, and the country that has got the least religion is the most prosperous, and the country that has got the most religion is in the worst condition. In the vast cemetery called the past are most of the religions of men, and there too are nearly all their gods. The sacred temples of India were ruins long ago. Over column and cornice, over the painted and pictured walls, cling and creep the trailing vines. Brahma the golden, with 4 heads and 4 arms, Vishnu the somber, the punisher of the wicked, with his 3 eyes, his crescent, and his necklace of skulls. Siva the destroyer, red with seas of blood, Kali the goddess, Draupadi the white-armed, and Krishna the Christ, all passed away and left the thrones of heaven desolate. Along the banks of the sacred Nile, Iris no longer wandering weeps, searching for the dead Osiris. The shadow of Typhon's scowl falls no more upon the waves. The sun rises as of yore, and his golden beams still smite the lips of Memnon, but Memnon is as voiceless as the Sphinx. The sacred fanes are lost in desert sands. The dusty mummies are still waiting for the resurrection promised by their priests, and the old beliefs wrought in curiously sculptured stone sleep in the mystery of a language lost and dead. Odin, the author of life and soul, Vili and Ve, and the mighty giant Ymir strode long ago from the ice halls of the north, and Thor, with iron glove and glittering hammer, dashes mountains to the earth no more. Broken are the circles and the cromlechs of the ancient Druids, fallen upon the summits of the hills, and covered with the centuries' moss are the sacred cairns. The divine fires of Persia and of the Aztecs have died out in the ashes of the past, and there is none to rekindle, and none to feed the holy flames. The harp of Orpheus is still, the drained cup of Bacchus has been thrown aside. Venus lies dead in stone, and her white bosom heaves no more with love. The streams still murmur, but no naiads bathe. The trees still wave, but in the forest aisles no dryads dance. The gods have flown from high Olympus. Not even the beautiful women can lure them back, and Danae lies unnoticed, naked to the stars. Hushed forever are the thunders of Sinai, lost are the voices of the prophets, and the land once flowing with milk and honey is but a desert waste. One by one the myths have faded from the clouds, one by one the phantom host has disappeared, and one by one facts, truths, and realities have taken their places. The supernatural has almost gone, but man is the natural remains. The gods have fled, but man is here. Nations, like individuals, have their periods of youth, of manhood, and decay. Religions are the same. The same inexorable destiny awaits them all. The gods created with the nations must perish with their creators. They were created by men, and like men they must pass away. The deities of one age are the bywords of the next. The religion of our day and country is no more exempt from the sneer of the future than others have been. When India was supreme, Brahma sat upon the world's throne. When the scepter passed to Egypt, Isis and Osiris received the homage of mankind. Greece, with her fierce valor, swept to empire, and Zeus put on the purple of authority. The earth trembled with the tread of Rome's intrepid sons, and Jove grasped with mailed hand the thunderbolts of heaven. Rome fell, and Christians from her territory, with the red sword of war, carved out the ruling nations of the world, and now Jehovah sits upon the old throne. Who will be his successor? End of section 16. This is a LibriVox recording read for you by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina on June 23, 2009. Section 17, Ingersolls Lecture on the Religion of Our Day. Ladies and gentlemen, I am glad that I have lived long enough to see one gentleman in the pulpit brave enough to say that God would not be offended at one who speaks according to the dictates of his conscience, who does not believe that God will give wings to a bird, then damn the bird for flying. I thank the pastor, and I thank the church for allowing its pastor to be so brave. I admit that thousands and thousands of church people, with their pastors and the deacons, are today advocating religious principles that they deem right and good. I honor these men, but I do not believe that their method is a good one. I do not want these people to forgive me for the views I entertain, but I want them so to act that I will not have to forgive them. I am the friend of every one who preaches the gospel of absolute intellectual liberty, and that man is my friend. Is there a God who says that if man does so and so, he will damn him? Can there be such a fiend? I am not responsible to man unless I injure him, nor to God unless I injure him, but one cannot injure God, for he is infinite. When I was young I was told that the Bible was inspired, written by God, that even the lids of the book were inspired. They say he is a personal God. If so, he has not revealed himself to me. There may be many gods. As I look around, I see that justice does not prevail, that innocence is not always effectual and a perfect shield. If there be a God, these things could not be. If God made us all, why did he not make us all equally well? He had the power of an infinite God. Why did God people the earth with so many idiots? I admit that orthodoxy could not exist without them, but why did God make them? If we believe the Bible, then he should have made us all idiots, for the orthodox Christian says the idiots will not be damned, simply transplanted, while the sensible man who believeth not will be sent to eternal damnation. If there is any God that made us, what right had he to make idiots? Is a man with a head like a pin under any obligation to thank God? Is the black man born in slavery under any obligation to thank God for his badge of servitude? What kind of a God is it that will allow men and women to be put in dungeons and chains simply because they loved him and prayed to him? And what kind of a God is it that will allow such men and women to be burned at the stake? If God won't love such men and women, then under what circumstances will he love? Famine stalks over the land, and millions die, not only the bad, but the good, and there in the heavens above sits an infinite God who can do anything, can change the rocks and the stones, and yet these millions die. I do not say there is no God, but I do ask, what is God doing? Look at the agony and wretchedness and woe all over the land. Is there goodness, is there mercy in this? I do not say there is not, but I want to know. And I want to know if a man is to be damned for asking the question. He eloquently recited the agonies that clustered around the French Bastille, where great men and heroic women suffered and died for loving liberty, and said, if there is a God, I think that one word, Bastille, would bring the blush of shame to his face. I find that the men who have received revelation are the worst, and that where the Bible goes, there go the sword and the faggot. If an infinite God makes a revelation to me, he knows how I will understand it. If God wrote the Bible, He knew that no two people would understand it alike. When I read the Bible I found that God in His infinite wisdom couldn't control the people He had created, and that He had to drown them. If I had infinite power and couldn't make a people that I could control, and had to drown them, why, I'd resign. Then I read in the Bible such cruel things, and I do not believe that God can be cruel. Such cruelty may make one afraid, but cannot inspire love. I can't love a God that will inflict pain and sorrow, and I won't. The preachers say all unbelievers will go to hell. Tidings of great joy. When I confront them, they say, I'm taking away their consolation. The old Bible does not mention hell or heaven. Now God should have notified Adam and Cain of hell, but He didn't. When He came to drown all those people, He didn't tell a single one that He would drown them. He talked all about water, nothing about fire. When He came down on Mount Sinai and told Moses how to cut out clothes for a priest, He never said one word on the subject. When God gave Moses the 10 Commandments engraved on stone, there He said not one word about hell. There was plenty of room on the stone. Why did He not add, if you don't keep these commandments, you will be damned? Through all these ages, when God was talking all the time, and when every howling prophet had His ear, not one word did He utter of hell or heaven. For 4,000 years God got along without mentioning those places or even hinting of them. It seems to me that we ought to have been notified by Him. Here the orator recalled many stories from the old Bible and subjected them to keen irony and ridicule. Reciting the story wherein the she bears came out of the woods and tore to pieces the 40 children who mocked the prophet, he asked, if God did that, what would the devil have done under the same circumstances? Why, he said, did not God give a sure cure for leprosy, unless He wanted to have His chosen people to have that frightful disease? Do you believe that God ever told a widow, if her brother-in-law refused to marry her, to spit in his face? Do you believe any such nonsense from a God? I call that courting under difficulties. Then Colonel Ingersoll dwelt pathetically on the sweet, innocent babes eaten up by lions in the den after Daniel was rescued from their jaws, and asked the question, what kind of a God was it that allowed such horrible deeds? They say that I pick out all the bad things in the Bible. Well, God ought not to have put bad things in the book. If you only read the Bible, you will not believe it. Why, it is such a bad book that it has to be supported by legislation. In Maine and elsewhere they will send you to jail for 2 years if you deny the Bible or the Judgment Day. No, we are told we must not only believe in the God we have been talking about, but must also believe in another one. Let us look at the church today. The Orthodox Church, that is, all but the Universalist. He is trying to be orthodox, but he can't get in. The God of the Universalists, to say the least, is a gentleman. Now, what is this religion? To believe certain things that we may be saved, that we won't be damned. What are they? First, that the Old and New Testament are inspired. No matter how kind, how just a man may be, unless he believes in the inspiration, he will be damned. Second, he must believe in the Trinity, that there are 3 in 1, that Father and Son are precisely of the same age, the Son possibly a little mite older, and that 3 times 1 is 1, and that once 1 is 3. It is a mercy you don't know how to understand it, but you must believe it or be damned. Therein you see the mercy of the Lord. This Trinity doctrine was announced several hundred years after Christ was born. Do you believe such a doctrine will make a man good or honest? Will it make him more just? Is the man that believes any better than the man who does not believe? How is it with nations? Look at Spain, the last slaveholder in the civilized world. She's Christian. She believes in the Trinity. And Italy, the beggar of the world. Under the rule of priestcraft, money streamed in from every land, and yet she did not advance. Today she is reduced to a hand organ. Take poor Ireland, groaning under the heel of British oppression. Could she cast off her priests, she would soon be one with America in freedom. Protestantism is better than Catholicism because there is less of it. Both dread education. They say they brought the arts and sciences out of the Dark Ages. Why, they made the Dark Ages, and what did they preserve? Nothing of value, only an account of events that never happened. What did they teach the world? Slavery. The best country the sun ever shone upon is the northern part of the United States, and there you will find less religion than anywhere else on the face of the earth. You will find here more people that don't believe the Bible, and you will find better husbands, better wives, happier homes, where the women are most respected and where the children get less blows and more huggings and kissings. We have improved just as we lost this religion and this superstition. Great Britain is the religious nation par excellence, and there you will find the most cant and most hypocrisy. They are always thanking God that they have killed somebody. Look at the opium war with China. They forced the Chinese to open their ports and receive the deadly drug, and then had the impudence to send a lot of driveling idiots of missionaries into China. Go around the world, and where you find the least superstition, there you will find the best men, the best women, the best children. 2 powerful levers are at work: love and intelligence. The true test of a man is generosity. That covers a multitude of sins. They have got so now they damn a man on a technicality. You must be baptized by immersion, sprinkling or pouring. If you come to the day of judgment and can't show the watermark, you're damned. What more, that a fellow named Adam, whom you don't know and never voted for, is your representative. You are charged with his sins. Equally abused is the doctrine of atonement, that you are created with the sacrifice of another. If Christ had more virtue than Adam had meanness, then you are ahead. Atonement is the cornerstone of the Christian religion, but there is one great objection. It saves the wrong man, and it is not honest. In holding up the atonement to ridicule, the orator said, if Judas had failed to betray Christ, the mother of Christ would be in hell today. Then he ridiculed the miracles recorded in the New Testament, pronounced them absurdities. He said that the 4 apostolic writers were very contradictory in their statements, and did not even agree as to the last word of this great man. The ascension was the most striking, the grandest of miracles, if true. Yet the ascension is only recorded by 2 of these writers. If he was God, I know he will forgive somebody for not believing the miracles unless convinced. Another contradiction in the book. In one gospel, the condition of salvation is whosoever believeth shall not be damned. And in another we are promised that if we forgive our enemies, God will forgive us. And there's sense in this last promise. The first, I believe, a lie. It was never spoken by God. Christ said, "Love your enemies." Nobody can do that. The doctrine of Confucius is sound, to love one's friends and to do justice to one's enemies without any mixture of revenge. If Christ was God, did he not know on his cross what crimes would be done in his name? Why didn't he settle all disputes about the Trinity and about baptism? Why didn't he post his disciples? Because he could no more see into the future than I can. Only in this way can you acquit him of the crimes committed in his name. The way to save our own souls is to save another soul. God can't turn into hell a man who makes on this earth a little heaven for himself, wife, and babes. Any minister who preaches the doctrine of hell ought to be ashamed. I want, if I can while I live, to put an end to all belief in this infamous doctrine. That doctrine has done incalculable harm, wrought incalculable injury. I despise it, and I defy it. The Orthodox Church says that religion does good, that it restrains crime. It restrains a man from artificial, not from natural crimes. A man can be made so religious that he will not eat meat on Friday, yet he will steal. Did you ever hear of a tramp coming to town and inquiring where the deacon of the Presbyterian Church lived? The Bible says, "Consider the lilies." What good would it do to a naked man standing out in the bitter blasts of this night to consider the lilies? What is the social position of a man in heaven who through all eternity remembers that if he had had a grain of courage he would never have been there? The religion of our day does not satisfy the intelligence of the people. The people have outgrown it. It shocks us, and we have got to have another religion. We must have a religion of charity, one that will do away with poverty, close the prisons, and cover this world with homes. End section 17. This is a LibriVox recording, read for you by Ted DeLorme on June 28, 2009, in Fort Mill, South Carolina. Section 18, Ingersolls Lecture on Heretics and Heresies, Part 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ingersoll's Lecture on Heretics and Heresies, Part 1, from the book Lectures of Colonel Robert Green Ingersoll, Volume 2. Liberty, a word without which all other words are in vain. Whoever has an opinion of his own and honestly expresses it will be guilty of heresy. Heresy is what the minority believe. It is a name given by the powerful to the doctrine of the weak. This word was born of the hatred, arrogance, and cruelty of those who love their enemies, and who, when smitten on one cheek, turn the other. This word was born of intellectual slavery in the feudal ages of thought. It was an epithet used in the place of argument. From the commencement of the Christian era, every art has been exhausted, and every conceivable punishment inflicted to force all people to hold the same religious opinions. This effort was born of the idea that a certain belief was necessary to the salvation of the soul. Christ taught, and the church still teaches, that unbelief is the blackest of crimes. God is supposed to hate with an infinite and implacable hatred every heretic upon the earth, and the heretics who have died are supposed at this moment to be suffering the agonies of the damned. The church persecutes the living, and her God burns the dead. It is claimed that God wrote a book called the Bible, and it is generally admitted that this book is somewhat difficult to understand. As long as the church had all the copies of this book, and the people were not allowed to read it, there was comparatively little heresy in the world. But when it was printed and read, people began honestly to differ as to its meaning. A few were independent and brave enough to give the world their real thoughts, and for the extermination of these men the church used all her power. Protestants and Catholics vied with each other in the work of enslaving the human mind. For ages they were rivals in the infamous effort to rid the earth of honest people. They infested every country, every city, town, hamlet, and family. They appealed to the worst passions of the human heart. They sowed the seeds of discord and hatred in every land. Brother denounced brother, wives informed against their husbands, mothers accused their children, dungeons were crowded with the innocent, the flesh of the good and true rotted in the clasp of chains, the flames devoured the heroic, and in the name of the most merciful God, his children were exterminated with famine, sword, and fire. Over the wild waves of battle rose and fell the banner of Jesus Christ. For 1600 years the robes of the church were red with innocent blood. The ingenuity of Christians was exhausted in devising punishment severe enough to be inflicted upon other Christians, who honestly and sincerely differed with them upon any point whatever. Give any orthodox church the power, and today they would punish heresy with whip and chain and fire. As long as a church deemed a certain belief essential to salvation, just so long it will kill and burn if it has the power. Why should the church pity a man whom her God hates? Why should she show mercy to a kind and noble heretic whom her God will burn in eternal fire? Why should a Christian be better than his God? It is impossible for the imagination to conceive of a greater atrocity than has been perpetrated by the church. Let it be remembered that all churches have persecuted heretics to the extent of their power. Every nerve in the human body capable of pain has been sought out and touched by the church. Toleration has increased only when and where the power of the church has diminished. From Augustine until now, the spirit of the Christian has remained the same. There has been the same intolerance, the same undying hatred of all who think for themselves, the same determination to crush out of the human brain all knowledge inconsistent with the ignorant creed. Every church pretends that it has a revelation from God, and that this revelation must be given to the people through the church, that the church acts through its priests, and that ordinary mortals must be content with a revelation, not from God, but from the church. Had the people submitted to this preposterous claim, of course there could have been but one church, and that church never could have advanced. It might have retrograded because it is not necessary to think or investigate in order to forget. Without heresy, there could have been no progress. The highest type of the orthodox Christian does not forget. Neither does he learn. He neither advances nor recedes. He is a living fossil embedded in that rock called faith. He makes no effort to better his condition, because all his strength is exhausted in keeping other people from improving theirs. The supreme desire of his heart is to force all others to adopt his creed, and in order to accomplish this object, he denounces all kinds of free thinking as a crime, and this crime he calls heresy. When he had the power, heresy was the most terrible and formidable of words. It meant confiscation, exile, imprisonment, torture, and death. In those days, the cross and rack were inseparable companions. Across the open Bible lay the sword and faggot. Not content with burning such heretics as were alive, they even tried the dead, in order that the church might rob their wives and children. The property of all heretics was confiscated, and on this account they charged the dead with being heretical, indicted as it were their dust, to the end that the church might clutch the bread of orphans. Learned divines discussed propriety of tearing out the tongues of heretics before they were burned, and the general opinion was that this ought to be done, so that the heretics should not be able, by uttering blasphemies, to shock the Christians who were burning them. With a mixture of ferocity and Christianity, the priests insisted that heretics ought to be burned at a slow fire, giving as a reason the more time was given them for repentance. No wonder that Jesus Christ said, "I came not to bring peace, but a sword." Every priest regarded himself as the agent of God. He answered all questions by authority, and to treat him with disrespect was an insult offered to God. No one was asked to think, but all were commanded to obey. In 1208 the Inquisition was established. 7 years afterward, the Fourth Council of the Lateran enjoined all kings and rulers to swear an oath that they would exterminate heretics from their dominions. The sword of the church was unsheathed, and the world was at the mercy of ignorant and infuriated priests, whose eyes feasted upon the agonies they inflicted. Acting as they believed or pretended to believe, under the command of God, stimulated by the hope of infinite reward in another world, hating heretics with every drop of their Bastille blood, savage beyond description, merciless beyond conception, these infamous priests, in a kind of frenzied joy, leaped upon the helpless victims of their rage. They crushed their bones in iron boots, tore their quivering flesh with iron hooks and pincers, cut off their lips and eyelids, pulled out their nails, and into the bleeding quick thrust needles, tore out their tongues, extinguished their eyes, stretched them upon racks, flayed them alive, crucified them with their head downward, exposed them to wild beasts, burned them at the stake, mocked their cries and groans, ravished their wives, robbed their children, and then prayed God to finish the holy work in hell. Millions upon millions were sacrificed upon the altars of bigotry. The Catholic burned the Lutheran burned the Catholic, the Episcopalian tortured the Presbyterian tortured the Episcopalian. Every denomination killed all it could of every other, and each Christian felt it duty bound to exterminate every other Christian who denied the smallest fraction of his creed. In the reign of Henry VIII, that pious and moral founder of the Apostolic Episcopal Church, there was passed by the Parliament of England an act entitled, "An Act for Abolishing of Diversity of Opinion." And in this act was set forth what a good Christian was obliged to believe. First, that in the sacrament was the real body and blood of Jesus Christ. Second, that the body and blood of Jesus Christ was in the bread, and the blood and body of Jesus Christ was in the wine. Third, that priests should not marry. Fourth, that vows of chastity were of perpetual obligation. Fifth, that private masses ought to be continued. And sixth, that auricular confession to a priest must be maintained. This creed was made by law in order that all men might know just what to believe by simply reading the statute. The church hated to see the people wearing out their brains in thinking upon these subjects. It was thought far better that a creed should be made by Parliament, so that whatever might be lacking in evidence might be made up in force. The punishment for denying the first article was death by fire. For the denial of any other article, imprisonment, and for the second offense, death. Your attention is called to these 6 articles established during the reign of Henry VIII and by the Church of England, simply because not one of these articles is believed by that church today. If the law then made by the church could be enforced now, every Episcopalian would be burned at the stake. Similar laws were passed in most Christian countries, as all Orthodox churches firmly believed that mankind could be legislated into heaven. According to the creed of every church, slavery leads to heaven, liberty leads to hell. It was claimed that God had founded the church, and that to deny the authority of the church was to be a traitor to God, and consequently an ally of the devil. To torture and destroy one of the soldiers of Satan was a duty no good Christian cared to neglect. Nothing can be sweeter than to earn the gratitude of God by killing your own enemies. Such a mingling of profit and revenge, of heaven for yourself and damnation for those you dislike, is a temptation that your ordinary Christian never resists. According to the theologians, God, the Father of us all, wrote a letter to his children. The children have always differed somewhat as to the meaning of this letter. In consequence of those honest differences, these brothers began to cut out each other's hearts. In every land where this letter from God has been read, the children to whom and for whom it was written have been filled with hatred and malice. They have imprisoned and murdered each other and the wives and children of each other. In the name of God, every possible crime has been committed. Every conceivable outrage has been perpetrated. Brave men, tender and loving women, beautiful girls, prattling babes, have been exterminated in the name of Jesus Christ. For more than 50 generations, the church has carried the black flag. Her vengeance has been measured only by her power. During all these years of infamy, no heretic has ever been forgiven. With the heart of a fiend she has hated. With the clutch of avarice she has grasped. With the jaws of a dragon she has devoured. Pitiless as famine, merciless as fire, with the conscience of a serpent. Such is the history of the Church of God. I do not say, and I do not believe, that Christians are as bad as their creeds. In spite of church and dogma, there have been millions and millions of men and women true to the loftiest and most generous promptings of the human heart. They have been true to their convictions, and with a self-denial and fortitude excelled by none, have labored and suffered for the salvation of men. Imbued with the spirit of self-sacrifice, believing that by personal effort they could rescue at least a few souls from the infinite shadow of hell, they have cheerfully endured every hardship and scorned danger and death. And yet, notwithstanding all this, they believed that honest error was a crime. They knew that the Bible so declared, and they believed that all unbelievers would be eternally lost. They believed that religion was of God, and all heresy of the devil. They killed heretics in defense of their own souls and the souls of their children. They killed them because, according to their idea, they were enemies of God, and because the Bible teaches that the blood of the unbeliever is a most acceptable sacrifice to heaven. Nature never prompted a loving mother to throw her child into the Ganges. Nature never prompted men to exterminate each other for a difference of opinion concerning the baptism of infants. These crimes have been produced by religions, filled with all that is illogical, cruel, and hideous. These religions were produced, for the most part, by ignorance, tyranny, and hypocrisy, under the impression that the infinite ruler and creator of the universe had commanded the destruction of heretics and infidels. The church perpetrated all these crimes. Men and women have been burned for thinking that there was but one God, that there was none, that the Holy Ghost is younger than God, that God was somewhat older than his Son, for insisting that good works will save a man without faith, that faith will do without good works, for declaring that a sweet babe will not be barred eternally because its parents failed to have its head wet by a priest, for speaking of God as though he had a nose, for denying that Christ was his own Father, for contending that three persons rightly added together make more than one, for believing in purgatory, for denying the reality of hell, for pretending that priests can forgive sins, for preaching that God is an essence, for denying that which is rode through the air on sticks, for doubting the total depravity of the human heart, for laughing at irresistible grace, predestination, and particular redemption, for denying that good bread could be made of the body of a dead man, for pretending that the Pope was not managing this world for God, and in place of God, for disputing the efficacy of a vicarious atonement, for thinking that the Virgin Mary was born like other people, for thinking that a man's rib was hardly sufficient to make a good-sized woman, for denying that God used his finger for a pen, for asserting that prayers are not answered, that diseases are not set to punish unbelief, for denying the authority of the Bible, for having a Bible in their possession, for attending Mass and for refusing to attend, for wearing a surplice, for carrying a cross and for refusing, for being a Catholic and for being a Protestant, for being an Episcopalian, a Presbyterian, a Baptist, and for being a Quaker. In short, every virtue has been a crime, and every crime a virtue. The church has burned honesty and rewarded hypocrisy, and all this she did because it was commanded by a book that men had been taught implicitly to believe long before they knew one word that was in it. They had been taught that to doubt the truth of this book, to examine it even, was a crime of such enormity that it could not be forgiven, either in this world or in the next. The Bible was a real persecutor. The Bible burned heretics, built dungeons, founded the Inquisition, and trampled upon all the liberties of men. How long, oh, how long will mankind worship a book? How long will they grovel in the dust before the ignorant legends of the barbaric past? How long, oh, how long will they pursue phantoms in a darkness deeper than death? Unfortunately for the world, about the beginning of the 16th century, a man by the name of Gerard Chauvin was married to Jean Lefranc, and still more unfortunately for the world, the fruit of this marriage was a son called John Chauvin, who afterward became famous as John Calvin, the founder of the Presbyterian Church. This man forged 5 fetters for the brain. These fetters he called points, that is to say, predestination, particular redemption, total depravity, irresistible grace, and the perseverance of the saints. About the neck of each follower he put a collar bristling with these 5 iron points. The presence of all these points on the collar is still the test of orthodoxy in the church he founded. This man, when in the flush of youth, was elected to the office of preacher in Geneva. He at once, in union with Farel, drew up a condensed statement of the Presbyterian doctrine, and all the citizens of Geneva, on pain of banishment, were compelled to take an oath that they believed this statement. Of this proceeding Calvin very innocently remarked that it produced great satisfaction. A man by the name of Caroli had the audacity to dispute with Calvin. For this outrage he was banished. To show you what great subjects occupied the attention of Calvin, it is only necessary to state that he furiously discussed the question as to whether the sacramental bread should be leavened or unleavened. He drew up laws regulating the cut of the citizens' clothes, and prescribed their diet, and all whose garments were not in the Calvin fashion were refused the sacrament. At last the people, becoming tired of this petty theological tyranny, banished Calvin. In a few years, however, he was recalled and received with great enthusiasm. After this he was supreme, and the will of Calvin became the law of Geneva. Under the benign administration of Calvin, James Gruet was beheaded because he had written some profane verses. The slightest word against Calvin or his absurd doctrine was punished as a crime. In 1553 a man was tried at Vienne by the Catholic Church for heresy. He was convicted and sentenced to death by burning. It was his good fortune to escape. Pursued by the sleuth hounds of intolerance, he fled to Geneva for protection. A dove flying from the hawks sought safety in the nest of a vulture. This fugitive from the cruelty of Rome asked shelter from John Calvin, who had written a book in favor of religious toleration. Servetus had forgotten that this book was written by Calvin when in the minority, that it was written in weakness to be forgotten in power, that it was produced by fear instead of principle. He did not know that Calvin had caused his arrest at Vienne, in France, and had sent a copy of his work, which was claimed to be blasphemous, to the archbishop. He did not then know that the Protestant, Calvin, was acting as one of the detectives of the Catholic Church, and had been instrumental in procuring his conviction for heresy. Ignorant of all this unspeakable infamy, he put himself in the power of this very Calvin. The maker of the Presbyterian creed caused the fugitive Servetus to be arrested for blasphemy. He was tried. Calvin was his accuser. He was convicted and condemned to death by fire. On the morning of the fatal day Calvin saw him, and Servetus, the victim, asked forgiveness of Calvin, the murderer, for anything he might have said that had wounded his feelings. Servetus was bound to the stake. The fagots were lighted. The wind carried the flames somewhat away from his body, so that he slowly roasted for hours. Vainly he implored a speedy death. At last the flame climbed around his form. Through smoke and fire his murderers saw a white, heroic face, and there they watched until a man became a charred and shriveled mass. Liberty was banished from Geneva, and nothing but Presbyterianism was left. Honor, justice, mercy, reason, and charity were all exiled. But the 5 points of predestination, particular redemption, irresistible grace, total depravity, and the certain perseverance of the saints remained instead. Calvin founded a little theocracy in Geneva, modeled after the Old Testament, and succeeded in erecting the most detestable government that ever existed, except the one from which it was copied. Against all this intolerance, one man, a minister, raised his voice. The name of this man should never be forgotten. It was Castellio. This brave man had the goodness and the courage to declare the innocence of honest error. He was the first of the so-called reformers to take this noble ground. I wish I had the genius to pay a fitting tribute to his memory. Perhaps it would be impossible to pay him a grander compliment than to say, Castellio was in all things the opposite of Calvin. To plead for the right of individual judgment was considered a crime, and Castellio was driven from Geneva by John Calvin. By him he was denounced as a child of the devil, as a dog of Satan, as a beast from hell, as one who, by this horrid blasphemy of the innocence of honest error, crucified Christ afresh, and by him he was pursued until rescued by the hand of death. Upon the name of Castellio, Calvin heaved every epithet, until his malice was satisfied and his imagination exhausted. It is impossible to conceive how human nature can become so frightfully perverted as to pursue a fellow man with the malignity of a fiend, simply because he is good, just, and generous. Calvin was of a pallid, bloodless complexion, thin, sickly, irritable, gloomy, impatient, egotistic, tyrannical, heartless, and infamous. He was a strange compound of revengeful morality, malicious forgiveness, ferocious charity, egotistic humility, and a kind of hellish justice. In other words, he was as near like the God of the Old Testament as his health permitted. The best thing, however, about the Presbyterians of Geneva was that they denied the power of the Pope. And the best thing about the Pope was that he was not a Presbyterian. End of section 18. This is a LibriVox recording, read for you by Ted DeLorme on July 8, 2009, in Fort Mill, South Carolina.